The gunshot echoed through the valley as Hazel Jennings scrambled for cover behind a weathered oak, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild stallion. Colorado Territory, 1873, was no place for a woman alone, but she had nowhere else to run. The town of Willow Creek had made that perfectly clear when they'd driven her out with whispers that cut deeper than any knife could. Barren. Cursed. Unnatural. Clutching her small bundle of possessions, Hazel peered cautiously around the tree trunk. The rider approaching from the east was tall in the saddle, his silhouette cutting a commanding figure against the setting sun. She held her breath, pressing herself against the rough bark, praying he'd pass by without noticing her. "Madam," the deep voice startled her, "you all right out here?" "These parts ain't safe for travelin' alone." Hazel gripped the small derringer hidden in the folds of her skirt. "I'm fine, thank you, just resting a spell before continuing on." The stranger dismounted with fluid grace, keeping a respectful distance. As he stepped into the dappled light filtering through the leaves, Hazel could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Name's Vaughn Monroe," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Got a ranch about 5 miles west of here." He glanced at her small bundle and the worn soles of her boots. "You look like you could use a hot meal and a safe place to rest." "I don't accept charity, Mr. Monroe. Wasn't offering any. My cook quit last week and I need someone who can manage a kitchen while I find a replacement. Pays fair and you'd have your own quarters." His gaze was direct but not unkind. "Unless you've got somewhere specific you're headed," Hazel hesitated. She had exactly $12 to her name and nowhere to go. The memories of the whispers and sideways glances in Willow Creek still burned fresh. 3 years of marriage to Thomas had yielded no children, and after his death from pneumonia last winter, the community's tolerance for her deficiency had quickly evaporated. "1 week," she said finally. "I'll work for 1 week and then I'll move on." Vaughn nodded, a hint of a smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Fair enough." The Monroe Ranch sprawled across a green valley nestled between towering peaks, a paradise hidden from the world. As they approached, Hazel counted 3 large structures: the main house, a spacious barn, and what appeared to be bunkhouses for ranch hands. A small creek meandered through the property, and in the distance, cattle grazed peacefully. "You live here alone?" Hazel asked, unable to mask her surprise at the size of the operation. "Got 8 hands who help with the cattle, most of them bunked together in the quarters over yonder." He nodded toward the smaller buildings. "Main house is just me, though. My father built it thinking he'd fill it with grandchildren someday." The weight of those words settled uncomfortably between them, and Hazel stiffened slightly. "I see." If Vaughn noticed her discomfort, he didn't comment on it. Instead, he guided her to a cozy room off the kitchen, simple but clean, with a narrow bed, dresser, and small window overlooking the garden. "Get yourself settled. Kitchen's through there," he pointed. "Whatever you can manage for supper would be appreciated, nothing fancy." For the first time in months, Hazel felt something like purpose returning. "I'll have something ready in an hour, Mr. Monroe." "Vaughn," he corrected gently, "we don't stand on ceremony out here." That evening, as Vaughn and 2 of his ranch hands brothers named Cole and Samuel devoured the simple stew and cornbread she'd prepared, Hazel felt an unfamiliar warmth. The conversation flowed easily, focused on cattle prices and weather patterns, blessedly free of probing questions about her past or her womanly failings. Days slipped into a comfortable routine. Hazel rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Vaughn and whichever hands were working close to the main house that day. She baked bread, mended clothes, and kept the house in order with an efficiency that spoke of years managing her own home. In the evenings, she prepared hearty meals that were met with appreciation and clean plates. On the 5th day, as she hung laundry in the yard, the sound of children's laughter drifted from beyond the barn. Curious, she followed it to find Vaughn sitting on a fallen log, surrounded by 3 young children, 2 boys and a girl, all listening raptly as he whittled a small wooden horse. "And then," he was saying, "the wild Mustang leaped over the canyon, just barely making it to the other side." The children gasped in delight, and the smallest boy tugged at Vaughn's sleeve. "Did the bad men catch him, Mr. Monroe?" "Not that day, Jimmy, not that day." Hazel must have made a sound because suddenly all eyes turned toward her. The children looked at her with open curiosity, while Vaughn's expression held something more complex. "Mrs. Jennings," he said, standing, "these are the Parkers' children from the neighboring ranch. They stop by sometimes when their pa brings supplies." The little girl, perhaps 6 years old with braided blonde hair, stepped forward boldly. "Can you tell stories too, madam?" The question pierced Hazel's heart. How many times had she imagined reading bedtime stories to her own children, singing lullabies? "Teaching little ones to bake bread or plant seeds? I know a few," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe next time," Vaughn interjected gently, noting her discomfort. "Mrs. Jennings is mighty busy keeping us all fed and looking after the house." The children nodded in understanding, but the longing remained in Hazel's chest, an ache so familiar it had become part of her. As she turned to leave, she caught Vaughn watching her, his eyes thoughtful. That night after supper, Vaughn found her sitting on the porch swing, staring at the stars emerging in the darkening sky. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. She nodded, shifting slightly to make room. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, listening to the chorus of crickets and the occasional lowing of cattle in the distance. "You're good with them," Hazel said finally. "The children," Vaughn shrugged, though pleasure at the compliment flickered across his features. "Kids are easy, they just want someone to listen and make them feel like they matter." "Is that what brought you out west, looking to start a family?" The question surprised even Hazel herself. It wasn't like her to pry, especially about such personal matters. "No," he said after a pause. "Came out with my father after the war. He fought for the Union, couldn't stand the bitterness back home in Virginia afterward, said we needed a fresh start." He gestured broadly at the ranch around them. "Built all this himself. I was just 16 when we arrived. And your mother?" "Died when I was young. Fever took her." His voice held old grief, well worn but never truly forgotten. "Pa never remarried, said no one could replace her." Hazel nodded, understanding all too well the kind of love that left no room for substitutes. "He sounds like a good man." "The best," Vaughn agreed. "Lost him 3 years ago, thrown from a horse while checking the north pasture." He turned to look at her directly. "What about you, Hazel? What brings a capable woman like yourself to be wandering alone in dangerous territory?" The night air suddenly felt colder, and Hazel pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "My husband died last winter, pneumonia." The words came out clipped, practiced. "The town, Willow Creek, it wasn't home anymore after that." Vaughn studied her face in the moonlight. "There's more to it than that." It wasn't a question, and for some reason that made it harder to deflect. Hazel stood abruptly, needing to escape his perceptive gaze. "It's getting late and tomorrow's baking day. Good night, Mr. Monroe." She was halfway to the door when his voice stopped her. "The week's up tomorrow." Hazel froze, her hand on the doorframe. She'd almost forgotten their agreement, had allowed herself to settle into the rhythm of life at the ranch as if it might continue indefinitely. "Yes," she said softly. "I suppose it is. Stay." The word hung between them, simple yet loaded with meaning. "Not as temporary help, as my cook and housekeeper proper. The men appreciate decent meals, and I—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I appreciate not coming home to an empty house." Hazel turned slowly to face him. "Are you offering me a job, Vaughn?" "I'm offering you a place," he corrected. "For as long as you want it." That night, Hazel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, weighing her options. She had no real destination in mind, nowhere she belonged. The ranch offered security, purpose, and a respite from judgment. And then there was Vaughn himself, kind, straightforward, and possessed of a quiet strength she found herself drawn to despite her best efforts to maintain distance. Morning came with her decision. She found Vaughn in the barn, checking a mare's injured leg. "I'll stay," she said without preamble, "but I want to be clear about something." He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'm listening, I can't. I'm not able to bear children." The words scraped her throat like broken glass. "If you're hoping for someone who might eventually, some men think a woman alone might be persuaded to. Arrangements can sometimes." "Hazel," Vaughn interrupted gently, "I'm offering you a job, not asking for your hand." His eyes held her steadily. "Your personal matters are your own." Relief washed over her, followed swiftly by embarrassment at having presumed his intentions. "Of course. Thank you." As summer progressed into fall, Hazel found herself settling deeper into life at the Monroe Ranch. She expanded the vegetable garden, preserved fruits and vegetables for winter, and even began helping with the bookkeeping when she discovered Vaughn's haphazard approach to record keeping. "You've been underpaying yourself for beef sales for nearly a year," she informed him one evening, spreading the ledgers across the kitchen table. "And overpaying for grain." Vaughn leaned over her shoulder, studying the neat columns of figures she'd reorganized. The warmth of him so close sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. "My father handled all this," he admitted. "After he died, I just did my best to keep up." "You've done admirably with the ranch itself," Hazel assured him, acutely aware of his proximity. "This is just a different kind of skill." His hand came to rest briefly on her shoulder, a gentle squeeze of gratitude. "Seems I'm luckier than I knew finding you on that trail." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was ready to name. Finally, Vaughn straightened, clearing his throat. "There's a harvest dance in town next weekend. Thought maybe you'd like to come along, see something besides this ranch for a change." The invitation surprised her. "I don't think the men's wives will be there," he added quickly. "And some of the neighboring families. Thought you might enjoy the company of other women for a spell." Hazel hesitated. She'd avoided town since arriving at the ranch, preferring the safety of isolation to the risk of new judgments. But the thought of an evening of music and conversation held undeniable appeal. "All right," she agreed cautiously. "I'll come." The town of Pine Ridge was smaller than Willow Creek, but bustling with activity when they arrived the following Saturday. The harvest dance was being held in the newly built schoolhouse, decorated with autumn leaves and golden wheat sheaves. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the proceedings as a fiddle player tuned his instrument in the corner. Hazel felt conspicuous in her best dress, a simple blue cotton affair that had seen better days. She'd spent the morning washing and pressing it, and had even pinned her hair up in a style she hadn't bothered with in months. "You look lovely," Vaughn said quietly as he helped her down from the wagon. He himself had traded his work clothes for a clean shirt and vest, his usually unruly hair slicked back with water. "Thank you," she murmured, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. The evening progressed pleasantly enough at first. Vaughn introduced her to several of the ranch hands' wives, who welcomed her warmly and pulled her into their circle. She met the local schoolteacher, a spirited young woman named Caroline who had come from Boston the previous year, and the shopkeeper's wife, Mrs. Sullivan, who complimented Hazel's pie at the refreshment table. "Vaughn Monroe's been bringing the same store-bought preserves to these functions for years," the older woman chuckled. "Nice to see a woman's touch from that ranch finally." "Oh, I'm just his housekeeper," Hazel corrected quickly, Mrs. Sullivan raised an eyebrow but said nothing further on the subject. The trouble began when Vaughn asked her to dance. The fiddle player had struck up a lively reel, and couples were forming sets across the floor. Hazel hesitated, but the encouragement of her new acquaintances and the warmth in Vaughn's eyes convinced her. They moved well together, his hand respectful at her waist, guiding her through the steps she hadn't performed in years. Hazel found herself laughing as they turned and stepped in time to the music, caught up in the simple joy of the moment. "You've been holding out on me," Vaughn said with a grin. "Never mentioned you could dance." "You never asked," she returned, matching his smile. When the dance ended, they were both breathless and flushed. Vaughn excused himself to fetch them drinks, leaving Hazel standing near the edge of the dance floor. She was still smiling to herself when a sharp voice cut through her reverie. "Well, if it isn't Hazel Jennings." The voice sent ice through her veins. Turning slowly, she found herself face to face with Eleanor Whitfield, the banker's wife from Willow Creek. The woman who had led the whispers against her, who had suggested to the town council that Hazel's condition might be catching like a disease. "Mrs. Whitfield," Hazel acknowledged stiffly, "I didn't expect to see you here. My husband has business interests in several towns," the woman said with a smug smile, "including Pine Ridge." Her eyes narrowed as she took in Hazel's appearance. "I see you've landed on your feet, poor Mr. Monroe. Does he know what he's taking in?" "I work for Mr. Monroe as his housekeeper," Hazel said evenly, though her heart raced. "Nothing more." Eleanor's laugh was brittle. "For now, perhaps, men can be so easily led, especially those with property, but sooner or later he'll want children, they all do." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "And what will you offer him then, barren as the desert?" Hazel's hands trembled, but she held her ground. "My personal matters are none of your concern, Mrs. Whitfield." "Oh, but they become everyone's concern when you try to trap a man into marriage without the ability to fulfill your natural duty," Eleanor hissed. "Just as you did with poor Thomas, the accusation struck like a physical blow." "I never trapped Thomas. He knew before we married that doctors thought I might have difficulty conceiving. Yet he died without an heir, all his hopes unfulfilled." Eleanor's gaze flicked past Hazel to where Vaughn was returning with 2 cups of punch. "I wonder if the good people of Pine Ridge would welcome you so readily if they knew the truth about you." Before Hazel could respond, Vaughn was beside her, his expression concerned as he noted her pallor. "Everything all right here. Perfectly fine," Eleanor answered smoothly. "Just catching up with an old acquaintance from Willow Creek. Mrs. Jennings and I know each other quite well, don't we, dear?" Hazel managed a tight nod, accepting the punch from Vaughn with a hand that betrayed her inner turmoil. "If you'll excuse us," Vaughn said, his tone polite but firm as he placed a protective hand at the small of Hazel's back. As he guided her away, Hazel could feel Eleanor's gaze boring into her back, and with it, the weight of secrets she'd hoped to leave behind. The joy of the evening evaporated, replaced by the familiar dread of exposure and rejection. "Who was that?" Vaughn asked once they were safely across the room. "No one important," Hazel lied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just someone from my past." Vaughn studied her face, clearly not believing her but respecting her privacy enough not to press. "Would you like to head back to the ranch? We don't have to stay if you're uncomfortable." The consideration in his offer nearly undid her. "No," she said, straightening her shoulders. "I won't let her ruin the evening." But the damage was done. Hazel felt eyes on her throughout the rest of the dance, noticed the whispers that followed as she and Vaughn moved through the crowd. Whether real or imagined, the scrutiny brought back all the shame and hurt she'd thought she'd left behind in Willow Creek. On the ride home, sitting beside Vaughn in the wagon under a canopy of stars, Hazel made her decision. She would leave before the rumors spread, before Vaughn could hear the truth from someone else's lips and look at her with the same pity or disgust she'd grown to recognize all too well. "I'll be moving on at the end of the week," she said quietly, staring straight ahead at the dark road. Vaughn's hands tightened on the reins. "Because of that woman at the dance, it's time," Hazel insisted. "I've stayed longer than I intended already. Did she threaten you?" "Because if she did, no," Hazel interrupted. "Nothing like that, it's just better this way." They rode in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. "I thought you were happy at the ranch," Vaughn said finally, his voice low. "I thought maybe you'd found a home there." The simple statement cracked something inside her. Home, such a dangerous word full of longing and possibility. It was never meant to be permanent. Why not? The question hung between them, demanding an honesty she wasn't sure she could give. When they reached the ranch, Hazel moved to climb down from the wagon, but Vaughn caught her arm gently. "Whatever she said to you, whatever's driving you away, I'd rather hear it from you than anyone else," he said. "You owe me that much at least." In the silver moonlight, his face was a study in sincerity, and Hazel found she couldn't deny him, not after all he'd done for her. "Can we talk inside?" she asked. They settled in the parlor, the room Hazel had brought to life over the past months with fresh curtains and polished furniture. Vaughn built up the fire against the autumn chill, then sat across from her, waiting. "I was married for 3 years to Thomas Jennings," she began, staring into the flames. "He was a good man, kind and patient, but I couldn't give him children." The admission still burned, even after all this time. "The doctor in Willow Creek said there was something wrong with me that I'd never conceive." Vaughn remained silent, his expression carefully neutral. "After Thomas died, the town turned against me. Said it was unnatural, a woman who couldn't bear children. Some even suggested it was God's punishment for some hidden sin." Hazel's laugh was bitter. "The preacher's wife stopped inviting me to social gatherings. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid speaking to me. And then the rumors started that Thomas had died of a broken heart because I'd failed him." "That's ridiculous," Vaughn said, his voice tight with anger. "Is it?" Hazel met his gaze directly. "A man wants sons to carry on his name, daughters to cherish. It's the natural order of things." "There's nothing natural about cruelty," Vaughn countered. "And that's what they showed you, pure cruelty." Hazel shook her head. "The woman at the dance, Alina Whitfield, she'll spread the word here in Pine Ridge too. It's only a matter of time before everyone knows." "And you think I care what gossips say?" Vaughn stood, pacing before the fire. "This is my land, my home. No one tells me who belongs here." "You don't understand," Hazel insisted. "Your reputation in town, your business, it could all be affected, and eventually you'll want a family of your own. A proper wife who can give you children." Vaughn stopped pacing, turning to face her with an intensity that took her breath away. "Is that what this is about? You think I'm looking to make you my wife?" Heat rushed to Hazel's cheeks. "No. I meant someday with someone because I've thought about it," he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "More than I should admit. Thought about how right it feels having you here, how the house became a home the moment you walked through the door." Hazel stood on shaky legs, her heart pounding. "Don't say such things. Not when you don't understand what it would mean." "I understand perfectly," Vaughn said, closing the distance between them. "You can't have children, that's a fact, not a failing, and it changes nothing about who you are or what you mean to me." "You say that now," Hazel whispered. "But someday I'll still be the man standing before you, saying children or not, you're everything to me." He reached for her hands, cradling them in his own. "If you want to leave because your heart lies elsewhere, I won't stop you. But don't go because you think you're protecting me, or because you believe those cruel words about your worth." Tears spilled down Hazel's cheeks, years of shame and self-doubt breaking free. "How can you be so certain? You've known me hardly any time at all." "Some things a man just knows," Vaughn said simply. "My father used to say he knew my mother was the one the moment she scolded him for tracking mud on her clean floor." A smile touched his lips at the memory. "Said a woman with that much fire was worth building a life around." Despite herself, Hazel laughed through her tears. "And what was my telling moment? When I criticized your bookkeeping? When I found you behind that oak tree, holding your ground even though you were clearly terrified," Vaughn answered, his thumb gently wiping a tear from her cheek. "Courage like that doesn't come along every day." For the first time in years, Hazel felt the weight of her supposed deficiency lifting. In its place bloomed a fragile hope, as delicate and precious as the first spring blossom after a hard winter. "I don't know if I can believe this is real," she admitted. "That you could want me, knowing everything." "Then let me convince you," Vaughn murmured, and he lowered his head to press his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it made her heart ache. When they parted, both breathless, Hazel looked up into his storm-gray eyes and saw no doubt, no reservation, only certainty and something that looked remarkably like love. "Stay," he whispered against her hair. "Not as my housekeeper. Stay because this is where you belong." That night, for the first time since Thomas's death, Hazel allowed herself to dream of a future not one defined by what she lacked, but by all she had to give. Word spread quickly through Pine Ridge about Vaughn Monroe's intentions toward his housekeeper. Eleanor Whitfield did indeed try to spread her poison, but found the soil less fertile than she'd hoped. The townsfolk had formed their own opinions of Hazel over the past months through her contributions to church socials, her fair dealings at the general store, and the obvious respect Vaughn's ranch hands showed her. When Pastor Miller announced their intention to marry from the pulpit 3 Sundays later, the congregation responded with genuine good wishes. Mrs. Sullivan pressed a handmade quilt into Hazel's hands after the service, and Caroline, the schoolteacher, offered to help with wedding preparations. "Told you," Vaughn said as they rode home that afternoon. "Good people care about character, not gossip." Hazel squeezed his hand. "I'm beginning to believe you." They were married on a crisp November day, with golden leaves carpeting the ground and the mountains wearing their first dusting of snow. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, held in the ranch's front yard with Vaughn's men and their families in attendance, along with a fair number of townsfolk who had come to wish them well. Hazel wore a new dress of deep blue wool, with a posy of late-blooming wildflowers. Vaughn had gathered himself that morning. When Pastor Miller pronounced them husband and wife, Vaughn's kiss held all the promise of their shared future, sealing a bond that had nothing to do with bloodlines or heirs, and everything to do with chosen family. The ranch thrived under their joint care. Hazel's practical management complemented Vaughn's ambitious vision, and within 2 years, they had expanded their herd and added a second pasture to the north. The main house, once so cavernous and empty, became a gathering place for neighbors and friends, filled with music and laughter. The subject of children arose occasionally, usually when well-meaning acquaintances inquired about their family plans. Vaughn always answered the same way: "We're blessed with what we have." And they were blessed, more than either could have imagined that day on the trail when fate brought them together. But life, Hazel discovered, had a way of offering second chances when least expected. It happened on a bitterly cold January evening in their 3rd year of marriage. A blizzard had descended without warning, stranding travelers and isolating homesteads across the territory. Vaughn had just returned from securing the last of the livestock when pounding on their door cut through the howling wind. A desperate-looking young man stood on their porch, snow crusting his beard and eyebrows, supporting a heavily pregnant woman who could barely stand. "Please," he gasped. "My wife. The baby's coming. Our wagon broke an axle 2 miles back. She can't go any farther." Hazel moved without hesitation, ushering them inside while Vaughn stoked the fire to blazing. The woman, little more than a girl, really moaned as another contraction seized her. "I'm Ethan," the young man said, his eyes wild with fear. "This is Mary. We were heading to her sister's place in Denver when the storm hit." "You're safe now," Hazel assured them, guiding Mary toward the bedroom. "I'm Hazel Monroe, and this is my husband Vaughn. We'll take care of you both." What followed was a night of fear, pain, and ultimately miracle. With no doctor available, Hazel relied on what she'd learned assisting at 2 births in Willow Creek. Vaughn boiled water, provided clean linens, and held the terrified Ethan steady with quiet words of encouragement. Shortly before dawn, as the storm began to abate, a tiny wail pierced the exhausted silence of the bedroom. Hazel, hands bloodied but sure, lifted the squalling infant and placed him on his mother's chest. "A son," she whispered, tears streaming down her face at the perfection of the moment. "You have a beautiful, healthy son." Mary's face, though drawn with exhaustion, glowed with a radiance Hazel had witnessed before but never fully understood until that moment. The connection between mother and child, primal and profound, filled the room with something that felt like holiness. Later, as Ethan dozed in a chair beside his wife and newborn, Hazel found Vaughn on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. "You were amazing," he said, pulling her close against the morning chill. "The way you knew exactly what to do, how to comfort her." Hazel leaned into his embrace, emotionally and physically drained. "I just did what needed doing." "You saved 3 lives tonight," Vaughn insisted. "That young man was half frozen when they arrived." "They never would have survived the night out there." Hazel nodded, still processing the enormity of what had transpired, holding that baby, seeing him take his first breath. She looked up at her husband, a new resolve forming. "I've been thinking, Vaughn, about our future." He waited, patient as always. There are children out there who need homes, orphans, little ones whose parents can't care for them. The idea had been taking shape in her mind for months, but the night's events had crystallized it into certainty. What if we opened our home to them? Not as replacements for the children we can't have, but as their own selves, deserving of love and family. Vaughn's smile was slow and sure, like the sunrise spreading across the valley. "I think," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "that sounds exactly like the kind of family we're meant to build." 2 months later, Pastor Miller brought word of 2 siblings, a boy of 7 and his 4-year-old sister whose parents had perished in a mining accident near Denver. The children had no known relatives and were currently being housed in the city's overcrowded orphanage. "They need a home, preferably together," the pastor explained over coffee at the Monroe's kitchen table. "I thought of you immediately." Hazel and Vaughn exchanged a look of perfect understanding. Within a week, they were on a train to Denver, hearts racing with anticipation and a touch of fear. The orphanage was a grim, institutional place that smelled of carbolic acid and too many bodies in too small a space. The matron, a harried woman with a perpetual frown, led them to a sparse visiting room where the children waited. Benjamin and Lily Porter sat side by side on a wooden bench, small figures with solemn faces that had seen too much hardship. The boy had his arm protectively around his sister's shoulders, his expression wary and far too adult for his years. The little girl clutched a ragged cloth doll, her eyes huge in her thin face. Hazel knelt before them, careful to keep a respectful distance. "Hello," she said gently. "My name is Hazel and this is my husband Vaughn. We have a ranch with horses and cattle and lots of space to run and play." Benjamin regarded them suspiciously. "They said our pa and ma aren't coming back." "No," Vaughn said, his voice steady and honest. "They're not, son. And I'm real sorry about that. Losing your parents is the hardest thing in the world." The boy's chin quivered slightly, but he maintained his composure. "They want to separate us, send Lily to one family and me to another." "We don't want that," Hazel assured him. "If you decide to come live with us, you'd stay together. Always." Lily spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you have other children?" Hazel shook her head. "No, we don't." "Why?" the little girl asked with a child's directness. Vaughn knelt beside Hazel, meeting the children's gaze. "Sometimes things don't work out the way folks plan," he explained. "But we have lots of love to give and a home that needs children's laughter to make it complete." Benjamin studied them intently. "Would we have to call you Ma and Pa?" "You can call us whatever feels right to you," Hazel said. "We wouldn't ever try to replace your parents, but we'd like to care for you if you'll let us." The siblings exchanged a look, having one of those silent conversations that only people who share a deep bond can manage. Finally, Benjamin turned back to them. "Lily wants to know if there are animals at your ranch. She likes animals." Hazel smiled. "We have horses and cattle and a cat named Shadow who just had kittens in the barn, and Vaughn is teaching our dog ranger to fetch sticks." Lily's eyes widened with interest. "Kittens, 6 of them," Vaughn confirmed, "all different colors." For the first time, a tentative smile touched the little girl's lips. "I like kittens." It took 3 weeks of visits, paperwork, and careful preparation before Benjamin and Lily Porter Monroe came home to the ranch. The children arrived with pitifully few possessions, some worn clothing, Benjamin's treasured jackknife that had belonged to his father, and Lily's cloth doll. Hazel had prepared rooms for each of them. with new quilts on the beds and small touches to make the spaces their own. Benjamin's room had a bookshelf with adventure stories and a wooden chest for treasures, while Lily's featured a rocking chair sized for a child and a collection of carved animals Vaughn had made. The adjustment wasn't easy. Benjamin had nightmares that left him shouting for his parents in the dark hours. Lily barely spoke above a whisper for the first month and followed her brother like a shadow. Both children expected punishment for the smallest infractions and seemed surprised by simple kindnesses. But day by day, healing happened. Benjamin discovered a natural affinity for horses and began accompanying Vaughn on short rides around the property. Lily formed an intense bond with the mother cat and her kittens, spending hours in the barn observing their antics and reporting back in increasingly confident tones about their development. By spring, the changes were remarkable. Benjamin laughed more freely and had started attending the school in Pine Ridge, where his quick mind impressed Caroline the teacher. Lily chattered constantly about the garden she and Hazel were planning, and had claimed one of the kittens a small calico she named Penny as her special companion. One evening, as Hazel tucked Lily into bed, the little girl asked the question they'd been expecting. "If you're not my real mama, what should I call you?" Hazel smoothed the child's hair back from her forehead. "Whatever feels right in your heart, sweetheart." Lily considered this with great seriousness. "My real mama is in heaven with the angels," she said matter-of-factly. "But you take care of me now and love me, so maybe you could be my new mama, and Mr. Vaughn could be my new papa." Tears pricked Hazel's eyes. "If that's what you'd like, we'd be honored. Benjamin says it's all right if we love you both," Lily confided. "He says our real parents would want us to be happy." "Your brother is very wise," Hazel managed through the lump in her throat. That night, lying beside Vaughn in their bedroom, Hazel recounted the conversation. "She called me Mama," she whispered, still awed by the gift of that simple word. Vaughn drew her close, his own voice thick with emotion. "Benjamin asked if he could help me brand the new calves this spring. Said his pa would have taught him if he'd lived long enough." "They're healing," Hazel said. "We all are." Over the next 5 years, the Monroe Ranch became known throughout the territory as a haven for children in need. After Benjamin and Lily came Maria, a 10-year-old Mexican girl whose parents had been killed in a border dispute. She arrived speaking little English, but with a determination that quickly endeared her to the family. Then came the Cooper twins, Ruby and Robert, whose mother had died in childbirth and whose father couldn't manage 2 infants while working his claim. Unlike the others, the twins maintained a relationship with their biological father, who visited when he could and contributed to their upbringing. By 1883, the Monroe household included 7 children ranging in age from 3 to 15, each with their own story, each an integral part of the family they had built together. The original ranch house had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing numbers, with Vaughn and the older boys adding rooms as needed. The townsfolk of Pine Ridge, who had once whispered about Hazel's condition, now spoke with admiration about the Monroe family and their boundless capacity for love. Even Eleanor Whitfield, during a rare visit to her sister in Pine Ridge, was forced to acknowledge the flourishing household Hazel had created. "You've certainly made something of yourself," she said stiffly when they encountered each other at the general store. "Though I still maintain a woman should bear her own children if she can." Hazel, with little Maria holding one hand and Ruby the other, merely smiled. "We each serve in our own way, Mrs. Whitfield. I wish you well." As she guided the girls outside, Hazel felt not a trace of the shame that had once consumed her. In its place was gratitude for the path her life had taken, rocky and unexpected as it had been, and for the man who had seen her true worth when she couldn't see it herself. That evening, as the family gathered around the long table Vaughn had built to accommodate them all, Hazel looked at the faces of her children, for they were hers in every way that mattered, and at her husband at the opposite end. His hair now streaked with silver, but his eyes still bright with the same love she'd first glimpsed by firelight years ago. Benjamin, now 17 and nearly as tall as Vaughn, was describing his plans to attend the university in Denver the following year. Lily, 14 and blossoming into a young woman with her mother's compassionate spirit, was teaching little Ruby to fold her napkin properly. Maria was helping Robert with his English pronunciation, while the younger children vied for attention with stories of their day. The noise, the chaos, the boundless energy, all of it filled Hazel with a joy she once thought would be forever denied her. This was her legacy, not measured in blood or birth, but in lives touched and hearts healed. Later, after the children were settled for the night and the house had grown quiet, Hazel found Vaughn on the porch swing where they had shared so many important moments. The moon was full, casting the valley in silver light much as it had the night he'd first asked her to stay. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, settling beside him. Vaughn's arm came around her shoulders, drawing her close against the evening chill. "About how smart I was to pick up a stray woman on the trail all those years ago," he teased. "Best decision I ever made." Hazel laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. "Is that what I was? A stray?" "You were a miracle," he corrected, his voice growing serious. "The answer to a prayer I didn't even know I was praying." Hazel thought of the journey that had brought them here, from the pain of Willow Creek to the joy of their present life with all its complexities and rewards. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Not having children of your own blood." Vaughn turned to face her, taking her hands in his as he had that night by the fire when he'd first declared his love. "Hazel Monroe," he said, his voice steady and sure, "every child who has crossed our threshold is my own. Every life we've touched together is part of our legacy. I have never, not for one single moment, regretted choosing you and the family we've built." In his eyes, Hazel saw the same certainty that had given her courage to believe in a future beyond her perceived limitations. The man who had said, "Children or not, you're everything to me," had kept his promise through years of joy and challenge, never wavering in his conviction that their love was enough, that she was enough. "I love you, Vaughn Monroe," she whispered, "with everything I am. And I love you, Mrs. Monroe," he returned, sealing the words with a kiss as sweet and promising as their first. "For all the days of my life." Under the vast Colorado sky, surrounded by the home they had built together, Hazel knew a peace that once seemed impossible. The wound that had defined her for so long had healed, leaving behind not a scar but a gateway to a different kind of motherhood, one chosen rather than granted, and all the more precious for the journey it had required. As they rocked gently in the night air, planning Benjamin's university arrangements and Maria's quinceañera celebration, Hazel reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her here. From the broken-hearted widow fleeing whispers and judgment to the matriarch of a sprawling, unconventional family, a transformation she could never have imagined on that lonely day when Vaughn Monroe had found her hiding behind an oak tree. Some might call it destiny. Hazel preferred to think of it as redemption, the kind that comes not from erasing the past, but from building something beautiful upon its foundation. A testament to the truth that family is not defined by blood alone, but by the choice to love without condition or reservation. And in that choice, she had found her true purpose, not as a vessel for continuing a bloodline, but as a harbor for children who needed one. Not as a conventional wife, but as a partner in creating something greater than either of them could have achieved alone. As moonlight silvered the land they had nurtured together, Vaughn squeezed her hand, a gesture that had become their private language over the years, speaking volumes in its simplicity. Hazel returned the pressure, a silent affirmation of all they had overcome and all that still lay ahead. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them as they had faced all others together, with the strength of a love that had never demanded perfection, only presence. A love that had seen beyond society's narrow definitions to the heart of what truly mattered. Children or not, they had everything,